right, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name's Dr. Jason Kane. I guess I'm the organizer of this year's day-to-day events. It's good to see you all here bright and early at 8 a.m. We've got two excellent speakers this year. This morning, our first speaker is Max Freund. He currently is the managing editor of digital at the Gazette in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He has previous experience as a reporter, working in web development and various other things. Currently, he's at the Gazette overseeing the company's digital products, strategies, and offerings. So we're excited to have him here today and kind of tell all you a little bit about how data is affecting journalism and things like that. So I'm not going to prolong the introduction. I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I appreciate you coming out at 8 a.m. I know I'm competing with sleep, and it's a hard battle to win. So as you said, I'm Max, and I live in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is that little dot right there, a little further north from you guys. Up there in that middle state, Iowa, Idaho, Ohio, they're all kind of the same thing. And I'm in one of those. As you said, I work for the Gazette as the managing editor of digital. It's kind of a holistic overseeing of the products, the development team, the content strategy, and some sales integration. For your kind of background, if you want to know kind of where I am and what I scope in, we're an independent company, so that's kind of rare in the media landscape today for a paper of our size. We are employee-owned, so we kind of get to make our own way. That's good, and that is also bad at times, because you don't have a pool of papers to test things at and rapidly iterate. We're kind of our own beast, and we figure things out as we go. We have absolutely no corporate overhead or initiatives that are dictated to us from some sort of holding company. And so we basically get to kind of pave our own trail. We have about 50,000 Sunday circ. That's actually not our daily. Our daily is closer to 40. And we have a website, thegazette.com, that has about 4.4 million page views a month as our main digital property. So that's kind of our scope. So I'm here to talk to you about data visualizations, both from the kind of reporting side and what you guys should be thinking about as you're reporting on stories and getting data sets from government agencies or other groups, and the ways that you should work with those while you're reporting, as well as talking about data visualizations from the front end, right? When you put them out in front of your readers, usually in the digital space, what you can hope that those readers can take away from them. We're going to talk about some of those concepts, and then we're going to go into some good examples, and then we're going to go into some bad examples, because we all like to make fun of people, right? So we're going to look at some bad data visualizations as well. So first, I want to talk about data visualizations and why they matter. At their core, I believe data visualizations matter because of this equation, 7 plus or minus 2. Does anyone know what that means? It's Miller's Law. It's the concept that people can remember in their short-term active memory somewhere between 5 and 9 pieces of stimuli, 7 plus or minus 2, right? And so if I put in front of you orange, eagle, cheese, seahorse, canoe, which is a weird thing to say, most of you can probably remember orange, eagle, cheese, seahorse, and canoe, right? That's only 5 things to remember. And if we kind of sat here for a minute or two and I asked you what were those 5 things, you'd probably be okay. And you could say them back to me: orange, eagle, cheese, seahorse, canoe. But if I added 5 more to them, Captain Yuppie Pirate, or Captain Yuppie Pineapple, Toothpick Pirate, it's a tongue twister, guys. Can any of you remember all 10? No, maybe not. I'm not going to quiz you. But it's a lot harder, right? And so basically, the more pieces of stimuli you have in your short-term memory, the harder it is to remember them, and even harder it is to make the connections between them, right? Those 10 things had no real connections. I was just asking you to remember 10 things. So how does this apply to journalism, right? How does this apply to your storytelling? Well, ultimately, I believe that stories are nothing more than a collection of data. Now, I don't just simply mean numbers. They are your people in your stories. They're your sourcing, right? They're the thoughts and the insights that they provide. It's the dates and the locations. It's all of those things that make up your sentences. All that at its core is data, right? It's pieces of information that an individual who is reading your story is expected not only to consume and understand, but oftentimes understand the relationship between. So how does that affect you as you read? Well, take this sentence, for instance. It matters to you guys. You're college students. This is about tuition. This happens to be about the University of Iowa's tuition. This is a fairly meaty sentence, but not one that should be all that surprising to you to see in a story. And as you can read this, I'll somewhat paraphrase it to you. The UI tuition proposals over the 5-year pitches for Iowa's 3 public universities increasing tuition for undergrads by 7.08% from 7,000-ish to about 10,000 over the course of the next 5 years. In-state folks can expect a 2.08% bump somewhere between, or excuse me, out-of-state folks can expect the bump from $29,130 up to $32,288 a year by 2022, right? So that's not that shocking of a sentence to see in a numbers and budget story. Anyone know the first number that appeared in that paragraph? No? No? Yeah. It was 5 year, okay? Now, what you probably took away from looking at that paragraph or hearing me paraphrase it is that tuition's going up, right? Not a shocking revelation in today's day and age, but it's going up. Do you remember the exact percentages? Do you remember the exact numbers? Maybe not, right? You kind of absorbed it. All of those stimuli came into your brain, and you found the connection and moved on from it. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not expecting you to read a story and then 10 days later be able to recite every number from it. But when you look at this big, meaty paragraph and you ask yourself, what is it? It's really a collection of data that you're expected to understand the relationship between. There's a lot of numbers in here. By the most generous count, in my opinion, without even taking repeats like 2022 is repeated down there, 2022, there's at least 9 different numbers for you to remember in one paragraph of one story. That's a lot of data. It's a lot of information that someone needs to comprehend and understand the relationships between it. But what if all of that information that's in that paragraph was in a chart? What that would look like is that. Now that is a much easier single piece of stimuli for your readers to comprehend. You have an in-state line, you have an out-of-state line. You have the 5 years spanning from 2017 to 2022 along the bottom. You have a y-axis that is from 0 to 35,000, and you have the natural progression of increase in that state, in-state and out-of-state tuition across time. Now I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm simply asking you to think about these opportunities to pair them together, right? You can write that paragraph and allow someone to read that content linearly, right? Comprehend it bit by bit by bit. But when you pair these things together, what you're providing people are 2 things. One, you're providing them a consistent point of reference while they're reading. So if people read linearly, people consume data visualizations all in one piece, right? Your eyes kind of bring all that data in and you kind of comprehend the entire ecosystem of that visualization. By giving someone the visualization next to the text, they have a visual cue point to bounce back and forth and help comprehend what they're reading. In addition to that, that visual summary is an all-in-one comprehensive consuming of that information. And in the digital space where attention spans are extremely fleeting, that can be very valuable to you. And we'll talk about time on page in a little bit. So ultimately, why does this matter? I think when you're looking at a data visualization like that, in addition to making it easier to comprehend the relationship between numbers, it also helps you spot trends. And this is something that I'm going to talk about a little bit for the next few minutes here. It matters to both your readers, but it matters to you as reporters. This is something that reporters need to do more of, in my opinion, is visualize prior to writing their stories. Think of the data visualization as a tool to help you with your reporting. If you look at this data visualization, you'll see some interesting things here. You might, oh, am I in front of the projector? No, it's not me. Okay. You might notice that the lines, even though the percentages were different, right? 2.08%, 7.08%. The numbers were different, right? One was down in the 7,000s, one was up in the 27,000s. Those lines, the slope of those lines are identical, right? It's the equal increase over time. And that was clearly controlled. The percentage was picked to allow for the number to raise at the same rate for both in-state and out-of-state. If you just looked at the paragraph, you might not have done that math in your head and seen that. When you visualize it, you see that. You see the slope of the lines are identical. And what that can do is provide you the opportunity for deeper analysis prior to your reporting. That slope and that change means that both numbers were increasing $3,051 over the course of 5 years. Now what that can do is lead you to potential questions for your sources, right? And I'm not saying this is true or false, but you could go to a source, someone who's in charge of pricing for tuition, and ask, is it fair for out-of-state students to share the same increase of $3,051, considering they're already paying a higher starting rate as we are, sitting here in 2017? What their answer may be is yes or no, or somewhere in between. But visualizing that data for yourself before you start reporting gives you insights to that data that can lead to good questions. And it's called interrogating your data. It's treating your data like a source. So I want to show you another example of that, a data set that I think has some really interesting interrogation opportunities that we did at the Gazette. So, other thing to realize, most data sets aren't small, and more importantly, you are not meant to look at Excel and understand insights from it. I'm not saying you're not meant to use it. I'm saying you're not meant to understand insights from it. This means nothing to you. If all you're doing is looking at a spreadsheet and you're like, yep, I got it. I know everything in that data set, you're lying to yourself. Especially if you have 216,742 rows of this. Good luck in getting all of that information, reading it row by row, and understanding what was on row 10 when you're down at the bottom of row 259, right? There's just no way that you're going to comprehend all of that data. We had 200, this is a story we play around with, ticket data for Iowa City for 4 years worth of tickets. And this is just an older example, but it's one that I really love because I think there's some fun charts in here. If you take this data set, it was every ticket issued in Iowa City for 4 years, and you start asking it questions, right? You write these questions down on a piece of paper just like you would write down questions for a source before you go into an interview. And there are questions like, what months are the most tickets issued? And how is the ticket issuing trended year over year? And what part of the day, morning, evening, night, when are people actually getting the most tickets? All of these are questions that you have to write down and ask the data set. The data set's not going to tell you, but the answers are hidden in there. And if you treat this as a source, you can start interrogating that data set and finding these insights. And so some of these questions lead to visualizations you want to do for yourself. For instance, month of year, not all that shocking. February, March, April, high. That's when students are back in January. August, September, December, or October, spike over there, right? Fall, students are back in Iowa City. That's a college town. Makes sense. Year over year trend. Why did it spike and go down? I don't know, worth a question, right? Something to talk to a source about. But here's the most interesting one to me. This is hour of the day ticketing, okay? This looks weird. You wouldn't know this if you just looked at 216,000 rows in Excel. You had to take every single ticket and ask it, what hour of the day were you issued? And create this little line chart, right? And what you see is a really strange valley right here at noon, where they're not issuing a lot of tickets. They're issuing a ton of tickets at 11 and a ton of tickets at 1 and hardly any tickets at noon. What's up with that, right? That's when people tend to be driving and parking illegally, would be my guess, because they have to go get food. But apparently they're giving people a break during that time. In addition to that, you find this cyclical evening pattern of tickets not being issued at 5, being issued at 6, not being issued at 7, being issued at 8. Which means they have some sort of weird cyclical issuing system going on, which means if you want to park illegally in Iowa City, I would suggest parking somewhere around 7 p.m. on a June day. You're probably in the clear. So teaching you how to park illegally. And if you want to learn how to park illegally here, request the data set and do this parsing. And you guys will be able to, I'm not sure why I'm promoting illegal activity, but it's a thing you can do with data visualizations. So what this allows you to do is create this cycle. And this is a thing that I think is really important to think about in your reporting process. You obtain data and you do data interrogation. That leads to a reporter visualization. That is something that is quick and easy for you to do. Oftentimes you can do it right in a tool like Excel. If you have a data set in Excel and you make a pivot table or something like that, you can look in that data set and see that trend right there visually. You can print that out. You can bring that with you when you go talk to your sources, and it gives you something to put in front of them and say, this is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing something similar? That will lead to your source questions, right? And then at the end, if you're deeming that data visualization something you want to put in front of your readers, you make a new version of that visualization that is that reader visualization. It might be a little bit more flashy. It might have a little bit more labeling. It might have the proper axis, all that sort of stuff. When you're doing it for yourself, you just need to see the trend and be sure that you're looking at a legitimate data visualization. So hopefully that kind of cleans to you why it matters to a reporter. Right? You can find some stuff in the data that you wouldn't have found otherwise, and if you go to that source and you simply ask a question like, hey, what are you doing with ticket issuing? That's going to be a lot less of a detailed interview than if you have those sort of visualizations on the forefront. But how do visualizations help your readers? Because ultimately that's our goal, right? We want readers to engage with our content. Now, the 7 plus or minus 2, the understanding the stimuli, all of that stuff is all about your reader and comprehending information. But I want to talk to you about user behavior and a couple of interesting things when you look in the digital space. So when we talk about users, here are a few kind of key terminology pieces that we use all throughout the world of digital reporting and content. So a session is the concept of a user visiting your website, right? So when you go to the Gazette.com or Facebook.com or whatever you're going to, that starts a session. And that session will last for however many page views you have, right? So most of the time you click around on maybe a page or two. That's one session, but maybe 2 or 3 or 4 page views, right? In addition to that, you oftentimes are watching time on page, right? So that's the amount of time that you spent consuming that piece of content on that page. And these are 3 metrics that newsrooms care about a lot, because what do sessions mean? Well, it means people are coming to your website. What do pages per session mean? Well, it means that they're finding your website to be exciting. And in the world of the internet, you're always 1 click away from cat videos, which makes it very hard to get people to read news. That's just a tough value proposition to win. And so if you're getting more pages per session, you're getting people to engage with your property, and that's a good thing to see. And last but not least, time on page. Of course that matters, right? If you've written a long story and you have no time on page on that page, it's 20 seconds or 10 seconds, it means no one's reading your stuff, right? That's not good. We want people to actually be engaging with our content. So, the fallacy, if they click it, they will read. I'm sorry, guys, it's just not true. If you think that someone who clicks onto your story is going to read the whole thing, you're wrong. If you believe everyone who reads your entire story, is, whoever gets it, you're wrong. No one does. It's just part of the game. Some people do, not everyone. It's just hard to get people to read the entire story. And just think about how you browse, right? When you go to a news site, you sometimes maybe read the first 2 sentences, then you start to scroll a little bit, you see if something catches your eye, you don't see something, you're browsing, you're looking for subheads, then I'm going to move on, right? And there are actually a couple of groups that did some pretty big analysis of data, and Chartbeat is one of those groups who has a lot of analytics, and they analyzed over 2 billion sessions of data that they have coming through their property, and they found that 55% of page views lasted less than 15 active seconds. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't read a full story in 15 seconds, right? And if 55% of the sessions that or page views that they were looking at were lasting less than 15 seconds, you are asking your reader to get engaged very quickly, right? And a data visualization can help you with that, because what that means is that you oftentimes have only a few moments to hook someone. Who here has been told that they buried their lead in a story? All of you have, whether you haven't, raise your hand or don't. All of you have buried your lead at least once. And that's the idea that you only have maybe 10, 15 seconds of them reading the first few graphs to get them excited. But in addition to that, people browse and scroll on the internet, and a data visualization can hook them. That's a really important one in my opinion, because ultimately that browsing, if you have a chart that's colorful and lines and beautiful stuff, that can catch people's eye. And that can help bring them into your story. Yeah, they're coming in the middle, but they might find something in that data visualization that excites them and bring them back up to the top, okay? Infogram, which is a charting kind of tool that's out there on the internet. I don't know if any of you have used Infogram. It's a perfectly nice tool. They looked at some data visualization, some stories with and without data visualizations within their kind of property. And take this with a grain of salt, because of course they're a data visualization tool, so they want to promote the value of it. But they found somewhere between 16 and 34% more comments and shares on stories with data visualizations. They found that there was 65 to 100% lift in the average session duration, right, the lasting of time when you have a data visualization as opposed to when you don't. And last but not least, there was over a 300% increase in the depth of scrolls. So that's the that's the depth within that page view that the person scrolls. So it's the idea that they found a data visualization, they got engaged, and they wanted to keep going. So if you're creating stories, if you're creating content, and your goal is to get people to read and understand your stuff, remember these 2 things. The more words, the more data you have in your paragraphs, the harder it is for people to comprehend the connections between them. A data visualization can help with that. And furthermore, if you want it to be shareable and long-lasting, sorry guys, the simple truth is this is not as visually exciting as this. It's not that this is bad. It's not that this isn't important. It's that this with this helps you comprehend and is just visually more engaging. And so that's the push here, is that what I like to say is that data visualizations are the candy that lets you feed people their vegetables, right? Ultimately, a lot of the stories we write are vegetables. No one's sitting there with a gun to someone's head saying, you better read this local news story, right? People are doing that because they kind of want to. They want to benefit themselves. They want to understand what's happening in their community. But they may have fleeting attention spans to that. They've got lives. They got busy things. They got work to do. They got a kid that's screaming down the hall. You got to keep them there with some excitement at times. And this can help you. Data visualizations can help you engage with readers. So, with that, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some good ones, some things that I think do some really good things, and some bad ones, and understand the right way to use a data visualization. Because just because you have data doesn't mean you necessarily know when and why and where to use it, okay? So let's start. with some good, because we like to look at good things. The first thing I want to talk about are data visualizations that establish impact. Now, what I mean by that is when you take a number and you chart it out over time, or you show something over time, and you kind of see that line just middling and not really doing anything, that's not visual impact, right? The power of that data visualization is to see something spike or to go down. And of course, you don't want to cook your numbers and make that happen. If the number isn't going up or going down, it just isn't. But when you have those opportunities to visualize that, you have a lot of power. Here's a paragraph. Don't need to read it to you, but something along the lines that when the measles vaccine was introduced in 1964, cases began dropping dramatically. By 1980, most states were reporting less than 25 cases per 100,000 people. At the peak, we were seeing as many as 20,000 cases per 100,000 people. That's 1 in 5 people. That's a lot of measles. That's data visualization. That to me is visual impact, right? Whole lot of measles to the left, whole lot of no measles to the right. Line in the sand, figuratively, in 1964, right? Doesn't mean that you don't need a paragraph like that to kind of explain what this is, right? This is helpful. But when you see that line and you see nothing over here, and you see all this red and yellow and green and blue over here, that really hits home to the importance of that vaccine to the public good, right? And so finding those opportunities where your data set spikes or valleys or goes off the rails in one direction, good, bad, or indifferent, ask yourself, can I make an impact to someone visually with this? And this was something done by the Wall Street Journal. They did it with many, many, many vaccines. It was a very interesting data visualization set. So I would suggest Googling Wall Street Journal data visualization vaccines, right? And this is just a scatter plot grouping with a linear time axis. So you can do this in a couple of tools, or you can actually kind of code this with just a table in HTML if you wanted to. So it's not terribly complicated to build something that would kind of equate this. So very cool data visualization that I was a fan of. The other thing that I really love about data visualizations in the digital space is that you can create visualizations that trigger action. So one of my pet peeves with large data visualizations is there's this assumption when you put them out there on the internet that people are going to like get excited by it and just like want to hunt through it and figure everything out. And once again, you're dealing with fleeting attention spans. So if you don't guide people with your data visualization and help them understand A, how it impacts them, but B, what you want them to do within your environment, you might lose them very quickly. So what I'm a big fan of are data visualizations that ask you questions and lead you to their answers, right? So oftentimes we want to know how things affect us, right? So if you're saying like, do you live in a neighborhood infested by tarantulas, right? You have a data visualization that can solve that for me? Cool, I want to find out if I do. I should probably know if I do, but your data visualization will help me, right? That's the idea, is if you can ask them a question in the way you write it, and you can kind of engage with them to kind of drill in deeper into your data and give them that next step, you can help them figure things out and get them into your data set. So this is the only time I'm going to show you anything we did at the Gazette here, really, is that what we have is, or next slide I'll go into it, but the idea is to not overwhelm them, right? And if you visualize, and if your visualization requires a large paragraph of text to understand what you want them to do with it, take a step back and ask yourself if I can clean this up, because you're probably making it too dense and too complicated to comprehend. So here's a little data visualization we did a couple of years ago at the Gazette around fireman response times, right? So we took Cedar Rapids, and there's a federal requirement that you must respond under 5 minutes and 20 seconds at least 90% of the time, right? So those are kind of the two things that are kind of the guidelines. 90% of the fires called in, you got to get there by 5 minutes and 20 seconds, or else houses will be burning and lives will be lost. And so we wanted to ask ourselves, did Cedar Rapids do this, right? So here's a scatter plot all around here. Red is no's and blues are yeses, right? So less than 5 minutes and 20 seconds, more than 5 minutes and 20 seconds. But what we did here is we asked a question to the readers. Is your fire department responding quickly enough to fires near you, right? We made it about you. We fed people's egos. We wanted them to check their address and then check their neighbor's address. Well, if they check their neighbor's, it's the same. Check their enemy's address, right? Check people who they like and don't like. And what you'll see here is if you entered your address, put your search radius, right? And there is a little bit of description here, and that's okay because it came after the request, right? So someone can just do their ego check first And then if they really want to understand all the details and understand blah, 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 you know, all the wordage, right, the stuff that actually kind of describes what's going on, they can read it. But ultimately, if you search my house, you learn that they did not. So I should move. They were only 77% of the time did they respond within 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So what that's doing is just giving someone a way to engage with your data visualization. Could we have put out the entire map as just the map with the dots on it and said, hey, browse, have fun, zoom in, try to find your address, look around, see if there's blue dots and red dots near you? Certainly, we could have done that. Instead, we put in front of them a question that led to action. And that saw a large increase in engagement for this data visualization with people actually actively searching, which you can do through analytics tracking, right? If you build an environment that you're hoping for someone to engage with, there's ways to add little tracking events within that in Google Analytics and say, did they enter a text thing into this field? Did they click on this button? All of those sorts of things can be tracked, which can then lead to more intelligent design in your next visualization. So this is a little bit denser. This takes a little bit of JavaScript to be able to write. So if you're interested in expanding your kind of acumen in the world of data visualization, this is probably beyond your standard tool, but it's a very useful way of thinking about data visualization. So that is one of the other things you want to do. And the last thing that I love about data visualizations, and this is a really simple example that you guys can do in Fusion Tables or a similar program, whatever you guys are using in your data visualization exercises within class, is a visualization that provides impact then context, right? So the idea is, wow, I understood something, and now I can look a little deeper. This is just a county map, all the precincts in a county, for a vote that occurred regarding whether or not a casino should be allowed to be built in this county. And the public got to vote on it, right? Now, this is actually still a storyline happening in Cedar Rapids right now. This was actually an old map. The casino got denied, and now we're back up again to try to get it. But the public voted yes. And as you can see, the public voted overwhelmingly yes, right? Could this be a sentence in the story? Absolutely, right? The Lynn County individuals voted 70 to 30% in favor of the referendum for a casino to be open. And we wrote a story with that in there, right? And there's nothing wrong with that sentence. But a big green box says that in a visual way, right? That pops on the screen that says, boom, wow, okay, they voted yes. What is the context, the additional layers beyond that, is notice the scale of green. The darker the green, the higher the yes, right? The lighter the green, the lower the yes. Notice where the dense greens are, right over here, right? Some denser greens, darker greens. And notice where the only reds really are is all around here, which is a small town of Mount Vernon, okay? It's just a small town with a liberal arts college in it. So what this is allowing you to do is see little visual trends beyond that first major visual impact, right? So big, colorful block of green, boom, yes, people voted yes, we got it. How did they vote? Well, all of these people really wanted the casino. You guys want to guess where in Lynn County the casino was proposed to go at that time? Right there. Right in the heart of that dense green. So what that says now is the residents who actually lived physically where the impact was going to be really wanted this to happen. Everyone else, yeah, sure, we're in favor of it, but we're barely 50%. We're barely 50%. Really above 50%, 65+%. Really in favor. So what's up with Mount Vernon? Why do they not want it? They're the only group who doesn't want it. That leads to some additional opportunities to hide that data more densely. So this is a Fusion Table pop-up box. Click on that precinct. It gives you this detail of full information about how people voted. So it's that additional context. People can go find what they care about. I live in Mount Vernon. I want to know how they voted. I live in Robbins. I want to know how they voted. But you have those additional opportunities to see that visual context beyond that initial pop. Okay? So that's the idea. That's the thing that I think is really powerful about data visualization and some good opportunities for you. So to recap, look for ones that provide that initial pop. Look for ways that you can engage with readers to ask them to do a task. Usually it's oftentimes egocentric. So how does this affect you? How are your tax dollars being spent? Are you safe in this environment? Right? All of those sorts of you questions can lead to kind of personal action and self-reflection. And then look for those additional pieces of context and the ability to layer information, because that's what these can really do. Now let's look at some bad ones. Okay? So the first thing I want to talk about are visualizations that mislead. Now, I have a little phrase that I kind of firmly believe, although I'm not always believe this, but is that data never lies, people lie about data, okay? So assuming that you are starting with properly collected, properly organized data, right? And the data has integrity. The data is not going to lie to you. What's going to happen is people are going to spin the reality. They're going to take components of the data and say, oh, I don't really care about those. I care about these, right? And they're going to try to control that. And one of the ways that people oftentimes control it is through misleading visualizations. We've all seen them. I'm going to show you one example. I'm going to spend some time on this one. And it's not trying to pick on this one too deeply, but I think this is a really powerful example. And I will preface this by saying it regards abortions, and I do not care whether you are pro-abortion or against abortion or somewhere between that spectrum. That is a legitimate debate to have within this country. What I am against is people having that debate with misleading visualizations as a way to support their perspective. Okay? That's what I'm against. And I want to talk about how that was done in an environment that is a very important environment, a congressional hearing. Okay? Now this is a fairly famous example. I'm not unique to finding this one at all. This is a well-known example, but I really want to go through this if you haven't seen this before. Okay? This is Representative Jason Chaffetz, and he was questioning President of Planned Parenthood about basically the amount of abortions that they were performing. And this was about federal funding to Planned Parenthood and whether or not that should continue and what, basically what he was saying, and I'll blow up the chart that he pulled up here, that here was his chart. Here's the chart he put out there. He was going on and on and on about how the problem is that you guys are just performing a ton more abortions and your cancer screenings and preventative services are bottoming out, okay? That was basically his line of attack. Here's the problem. Well, actually, before I go into the problems, what happened was she kind of was very defensive and saying, well, you're just throwing me this chart out of nowhere. And he keeps going, well, I pulled these numbers directly from your report. She's like, well, I'm happy to review it, but you're just showing me this at this moment. She was very deflective. And how it ended was her lawyer came up behind her and told her that, hey, the source on the bottom is Americans United for Life, which is an anti-abortion group. And so she kind of deflected right there. She's like, so you should probably check your sources, making the implication that the data was wrong, right? Making the implication that these numbers can't possibly be true. That was a fine way to deflect. I would have much preferred that she deflected by saying, your chart is bogus, okay? Because what is true is the numbers. The numbers on this chart are actually accurate, and we're going to go through this in a bit by bit. What is not true is the visualization of the numbers, okay? The visualization is misleading. The data isn't lying. The person is lying about the data, okay? Because the person made the visualization. Let's walk through how. So, intersection. You guys see that right there? What does an intersection tend to suggest about data lines? Anyone know? Cross, but what does cross mean? Equal, yes. More often than not, a cross means equality, right? The only time that it doesn't is if you have true unique axes, two different axes. If you were trying to chart people enrolled in school and average cost of school, well, those are drastically different numbers, right? One is a numeric count of people, and another is a dollar amount. There's no way to place those on the same axis. So you may need to have two y-axes to show that chart, which means you may have intersection without union. In this case, you're talking about a numeric count of services rendered, right? An abortion or cancer screening and preventative services. Those are numeric counts. Therefore, they should have the same axis, which means if you have a cross, you're implying equality, right? What's the next problem? There's no axis. It's just art at this point. There's no data here that you can, there's no reference point for your data here. It's just art. It's just an artistic rendering of numbers. The third thing is a crime of omission, if you will. Cancer screening and prevention services. Does that sound all-encompassing to you? Kind of does, right? That sounds to me like an all-encompassing group where abortions is the separate group, right? So if I told you that the numbers were real, right? I said this 2 million and this 900,000 and this 300,000 and this 280,000 are real, but the data visualization is art. That means that's the only thing we're going to keep. And we're going to rebuild. That's correct. Those numbers are correct, at least according to the report. I don't really know, but I know according to Planned Parenthood's own report, those are real. So, first thing that was wrong was axis, right? There was none. We didn't have an axis. Let's fix that. Here you go. Okay? That's controlled for an axis. You notice the axis down here at 0, the axis up here at 2.5 million. It's the same axis for both lines. And you can look at this and say, hey guys, what's going on here? Why is this bottoming out, right? Talk about a proper data visualization leading to a constructive debate and exchange of ideas. 100% supportive of that, whether your opinion is pro, con, or anywhere in between. This gets you closer to that, right? This allows you to have a legitimate debate. Why is this number bottoming out? Now, this number doesn't look like it's exploding in the way that it did before. It is still rising. It is still 200 and some thousand, up to roughly 320,000. But when you control for the axis and have it on the same plane as the other data, it doesn't show that visual explosion, right? So that's one thing that's there. Remember when I talked to you about the preventative services as being a little all-encompassing sounding? Yeah? Well, it is a little all-encompassing sounding, but it's not all of the services that they were rendering. There you go. That is every single line of data that was in that report that showcases the entirety of the services that Planned Parenthood was rendering, okay? So you'll notice that these two are still here, abortions in blue, cancer services and preventative screenings in red, numbers still going down, but there are two other numbers way up here in the 3 and 4 millions around contraception, as well as STI and STD treatment and testing. And you have another pregnancy testing line that's right here, and you have another services, which is your all-encompassing catch-all that's kind of bottomed out down here, about 100,000 or so a year, okay? This is a very different chart, right? Now, you can look at this chart and say, I got a problem with that blue line. You can have that conversation. You can say, I don't think it is fair for the federal government to be putting any money into an organization in which that line is anywhere above 0. That's my personal belief, and that's what I want to see. But if you're going to have that perspective, you also have to understand the entirety of what some of that federal funding is going to, and all this other services rendered, and to make your personal decision of whether or not you think that's good or bad. When we had a chart that said cancer screenings and prevention services, that was implying an all-encompassing group, was it not? So let's make it an all-encompassing group. There you go. That's the chart. That is abortions, and that is non-abortion services, year over year. The entire ecosystem compared to that one small group. That chart is very different than that chart. Can we agree? Both of these are based in real numbers. One is a legitimate way to visualize it, and one is art, okay? This is causing a visceral reaction and is designed to cause a visceral reaction that leads to emotional decision-making and not data-based decision-making. This is a data-based decision-making tool, right? And that's the main difference. So the reason why I'm going on in this example, and I think it's an important one, is that's the type of stuff that can happen at the highest levels of government, right? No one forced Representative Chaffetz to pick that data visualization to use, which means only one of two things is happening. I do not know the man. I do not have an opinion about him. But only one of two possible scenarios are happening there. Either one, he was intentionally misleading, right? He knew the data visualization was wrong, or his aides did, or whoever pulled it, right? That's a possibility. That he was aware that it was incorrect and was visualizing the data without a proper y-axis and without the other services, but he used it because it fed his personal beliefs, which is perfectly possible. Or two, he is so completely data illiterate that he did not see the incorrect problems within there. I think both are bad things, right? I can't think of a third possibility. Those are really, to me, the only two possibilities. And if at the highest level of government we're seeing those two things happen, we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to be strong stewards of data literacy. And that's part of our job and responsibility in the media landscape, is to understand data literacy and understand proper visualization, okay? All right, I'll get off my soapbox. Visualizations that fail to showcase the important element. This is something that I really think is a nuanced component. Now, there's different types of data visualizations, and they all have different purposes. Now, I'm not going to go deeply into the different types, but when we talk about line charts or bar charts or maps, they have purposes. A line chart is to show the continuity of a data set over time, right? It draws that line for you. So if you're trending some sort of statistic over a time period, you want to use a line. If you want to compare data sets, you want to say, hey, this data set, how did it perform compared to this one? You oftentimes want to use a bar chart because bars are easy visual comparison groups. And a map more often than not, is thought of as the proper way to deal with geographic information, right? So here's an example that goes all the way back to the 2010 elections. Now, this was a long time ago, and this is a wonderful example, but there was a major swing in the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives saw it move from Democrat to Republican, and to a degree, this was a surprise. There was definitely some upsets that occurred. Now, because representative districts are geographic, right? They're geographic space. You have representatives here in Mississippi. We have some up in Iowa. Every state has them. The thought right there is it must be a map, right? If it's geographic, it's got to be a map. And here's a map made by the New York Times. Holy cow, that country is red, right? Now, here's why the map is less important than what was actually the story. First and foremost, some congressional districts are really big, like Wyoming and Montana and Idaho, not Iowa. There's Iowa, Idaho, Iowa. So geographic is a little misleading on importance, right? Because this guy or gal has as much weight as this guy or gal or this guy or gal or this one, right? So a geographic representation is a little misleading on power. So you got to understand visually how that can be conveyed to an individual when you do it via a map. The second thing is the position of where they existed wasn't really the story. The story was the surprise turn. The story was the fact that a lot of Democrats who were expected to win, or even heavily favored to win, lost. That's not shown here. You have no context for whether or not the person who won that district was supposed to. Now, there's nothing wrong with this data visualization. It's a fine way to show the information. And this was done by the New York Times. But they also did a different visualization to pair with it. And their visualization that they did was, so it's this guy, okay? Now, it's stacked. I know it's kind of hard to see, but 242 Republican seats, 193 Democrat seats, 63 seats lost by the Democrats, 63 seats gained by the Republicans. Okay, so that's that swing. What they did was they took a poll, I don't know exactly which poll they used, but some poll that was doing likelihood of win up to the election for each candidate in each House race, and they siloed them into 5 silos. Democrats expected to win easily, Democrats expected to win narrowly, toss-up seats, so almost a 50-50. Republicans expected to win narrowly. Republicans expected to win easily, right? And whatever their qualifications was, if you're above 2 to 5% or something, you might be in the narrow expectation to win, and 5 to 10% or 5% plus, you were in the heavily favored. They have that documentation on their site. And then what they did was they simply mapped it with a table. This is just a table, guys. You could make this with HTML in 2 minutes if you have any basic HTML skills. And what you'll see here is that every single seat that was even narrowly or majorly expected to go Republican did. This is the end of this column. This is the end of this column, okay? So the Republicans didn't lose a single seat that they were favored to win by any amount, okay? The Democrats lost most of the toss-ups, right? And this is the toss-up column. I mean, it was a complete victory in the toss-up space, Republican over Democrats. But the more shocking component is this column. They lost a couple here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 seats that were leaning Democrat. They lost. And they actually, you don't see it here, it's way down here. There was actually 2 of them in the heavily favored that I couldn't get in one screenshot for the Democrats. So that's the story, right? That's the component that is the most shocking part of the story, is that even up to Election Day, in the polling that was saying Democrats are going to win these seats, they lost a large number of the ones they were favored in, and they got destroyed in the toss-up, right? This doesn't show you that. This is fine. There's nothing wrong with this data visualization. It's just not necessarily showcasing the piece of information that is most compelling to the story. And so don't get caught in tropes of data visualization. If you've got a geographic component to your data set, doesn't necessarily mean it's mapped, right? The only time you want to map it is if the component of the geography, right, where that dot happens, where that element exists on the map, is the most important component. If it isn't the most important component to the data set, it likely isn't the way you want to visualize that data. So think about the data types you're dealing with. Is over time the most important? Make it a line. If comparison in groups is most important, make it a bar. If the geographic location is most important, do a map. If it's a comparison in groups in some sort of visual format that you want to do, like the data visualization we have here, with some other external influence like likelihood, maybe a table view with a color coding is a good way to go. So that's just taking a step back and asking yourself, what am I really trying to convey? Because you can do a data set in many different visualization formats. You've got to pick the one that you want to use. So, you guys with me so far? Let's have some fun. Let's laugh at some garbage, okay? All right, so the hell is that? First and foremost, here's a problem with a data visualization like this. This is an example of my least favorite form of data visualization, a pie chart, okay? Here's something that's wrong with pie charts. If I get nothing through your head, it's stop using pie charts. That would be my hope today. Pie charts are garbage for a couple of reasons. First reason that they're a pile of garbage is more often than not, you are not dealing with 100%. A lot of people just misuse pie charts. They're like, I got 3 things. I want to compare them in size. I'm going to put them in a pie. You're making a tacit endorsement that this is the entire ecosystem when you do a pie, because a circle is implicating that this is the entire world, right? But very often that is not true. You are often omitting a component, right? So if I were going to do like enrollment in university departments, for example, I would need to get every single university department to be a pie, right? I've got to show the entire ecosystem. And that might be like 150 wedges, right? I don't know how many departments you guys have, but you probably have a lot, right? If I want to just show the comparison between 3 departments, I could put them on a bar chart, right? 3 bars. I'm not making a statement that these are all of the ecosystem of departments. I'm just saying these are 3, and we're comparing the enrollment across them. So almost every pie chart could be a bar chart, and it would just be better, which leads to the second component. Your brain is just bad at seeing differences in shapes that are triangular like this, as opposed to rectangular like this. So much so that most pie charts come with numbers, which basically is defeating the purpose of the pie, right? If you need to give me the percentages across the board for every single shape, your shapes are probably meaningless garbage, right? Now when you put them inside of a weird man shape, in which the 22% on his butt is about the same size as his 40% head, you're just an artist getting, having fun, right? Furthermore, here's another example of pie charts that happen a lot of times, because this is not a circle, but it implies completeness, right? This is a singular shape. Yet does 88 plus 87 plus 86 equal 100%? No, we're all tired, but we can all do that math in our head. It is not 100%. Also, is this the same size as this? No, it's apparently the same percentage though. So stuff like this is just weird, right? So stop doing pie charts. Your life and everyone's life will be better. Let's keep going. In addition to this, here's a bar chart that isn't a bar chart. This is sales by fast food companies. Now, okay, I think we can all understand that McDonald's is selling more than Burger King and Wendy's and KFC and Pizza Hut and so on and so forth. But here's a couple of weirdnesses of this. The widths of the logos, does that mean something, or is that just the logo? I don't know. That's kind of confusing to me. Also, why is Afghanistan behind everything? Apparently, the GDP of Afghanistan is 21 billion, so its tip of the shape of the country goes right here. But because the country is shaped the way it is, its width needs to go behind Burger King. Does that imply that Burger King and McDonald's have a stake in Afghanistan while the other countries don't? I don't know, right? Just make this a bar chart. Stop being cute, right? You don't need to do that. It's just confusing the data set. Okay, remember when I yelled at you about axes and you're like, this guy shut up about axes? Here's why it matters, okay? Here's a chart of a number, job loss by quarter, going up, 7, 9, 13.5, and 15 million. Is 7 less than 15? Yes, we can agree on that. Is this line going up then? Yes, we can agree on that. Should we decide on the slope though? Yeah, we should. Should this slope be like this? Should it be like this? Should it be like this? We have no axis, so we can't decide. We have no ability to affect the proper slope of that line without an axis. And here's a more egregious version of that when you look at bar charts. People do this all the time, right? 165,000, 170,000, 192,000. Are those numbers going up? Yes, right? Is this number roughly half this number? No, right? What is missing here? Open question. What's missing to control this visualization properly? Any guesses? No?
Oh, the width of the length at the bottom.
The length, yes, the length. I just pointed a laser pointer at you. There's no 0. The only starting point for almost every data visualization you ever do should be 0, okay? And you'll have this happen to people where people will be like, but it won't look as intense. Yeah, because that's just the reality of the numbers. I'm sorry, 165,000 is not half of 192,000. So you need the bars to be properly sized. If you did this and had a 0 here, you'd have a pretty big bar, you'd have a slightly larger bar, and you'd have an even bigger but not insanely large bar, right? You'd control your zeros. And if you start with 0, you have a properly controlled visualization. Yes, sir? No, I mean, you could do it because you're saying it's loss, right? But as long as you're controlling that it's a loss number, people can understand that you lost 7 million, then you lost 15 million. If you were doing like an overall like employment statistic of gains and losses, you might do it off the 0. We gained 500, we lost 500. But if it's all loss statistic and you're just showing that as a single number, as long as you anchor what that means, you're fine going positive. What you should have, though, is a 0, so that it should start here, and it should be up at 7 million, and then go up based off of a statistic that is leveled on an axis, right? Okay, so that one I think is important. Here's another one that I love. Commuting to work. Percentages of people who drive themselves, who carpool, who take public transport, who walk to work, and who bike. This, to me, is interesting data. I'd love to know the percentages. I have 0 numbers anywhere. I have no idea what any of these percentages are. I'm going to assume that people who drive themselves in Houston is 70%? 60%? I don't know. Atlanta seems to be a decent amount. New York City makes sense. Don't drive themselves, a smaller percentage. But all we need is a 0, 50, 100. What is it? And give me some cues, right? The width of these items, does three letters mean more people than 2, or is that just because that's the shorthand for that city? I have no insights from that. I don't really know, right? So put some scales on your stuff and probably use bars. And last but not least, for you print folk, know your medium. Looks pretty unified to me. Not sure what's going on here. Would love to know. Would really love to know how this was broken apart. But, you know, are you on the front page or are you on an inside page? It's worth knowing. So that is basically what I had for you guys. Oh my gosh, dirty desktop. Remove, remove, remove. I swear I'm an organized person. I'm not. With that, I've got about 5-10 minutes left. I'd love to answer any questions if you've got them. If there's anything you want me to go in a little bit more detail about. If you're wondering where to start with data visualizations, so this is something that I get people asked sometimes of, okay, this is cool stuff and I want to do more of it, but where do I go? Where do I start? First and foremost, I'm a big proponent of free tools. I think that it helps you kind of get your feet in wet and see if it's something that's right for you. There's a couple tools I know you guys have access to here in the school. One that I'm a big fan of with my students, where I teach at the University of Iowa, is Fusion Tables. Google is not paying me, although they're probably watching us right now. Fusion Tables is a wonderful free tool that Google provides that allows you to do any one of the core 5 visualizations of line, bar, pie, map, and scatter plot. Those are 95% of what you're going to need. It's all free. It's all accessible at any computer because it's in the cloud, and it's pretty clean. It's very easy to get in there and learn. As far as finding data sets, that's oftentimes a question I get. You got to work on the reality that outside of government agencies, most private corporations that aren't publicly held, but in some capacity, like stock ownership or something like that, don't have to really give you your data, right? So you can go to like a business and be like, hey, how are your sales this last month? And they'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to tell you, right? But if you're dealing with a public agency, a government agency, oftentimes they have reports that they have to file either with the state or with federal level, and you oftentimes get access to that through freedom of information requests. A really great starting point, though, is look at the census data. The reason why I like census data, and you can find it through the American Fact Finder, is let's say you find a statistic, right? Let's say you get data from somewhere that tells you the amount of people in each county in your state that eat fast food 5 times a day, right? Well, this should be a lot, but 5 times a week. Let's go with that, right? Let's just say that's a data set you got from a Department of Public Health. 5 times a day or 5 times a week, fast food consumption by county. You got a percentage. Well, what you probably want to know then is, okay, here are these 5 counties in my state that have really high, and here are these 5 counties in my state that have really low fast food consumption. You want to know more about those people, right? You want to know what are their socioeconomic status, what's maybe their racial breakdown, what's their employment status, all those sorts of things. That's where the census data can be really helpful because it can allow you to have that context added to whatever data set you're working with. There's a tool called the American Fact Finder. Just Google that, you'll find it, that lets you quickly pull out the census tracts or the counties or the states you care about, and then just add the demographic data you want to see. So you want to say, well, I want to know how old these people are by county, because I think I have in my head that young people are eating more fast food. Well, you can check that, right? You can pull in the counties, you can pull in their ages on average, and then you can cross-reference that to your data set about fast food consumption. So that's a great way to build context as you're doing your reporting, because a number on its own, right? This percentage of people in this county are eating fast food more than others. Okay, that's fine, but do I know more about those people, and can I know more about those people? And the census is a wonderful starting point for that. So those would be kind of little insights I have about where I would go, and oftentimes how I drive for additional context about the population size. So. With that, if there's anything you guys want to talk about, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about what I'm looking for in employees, what I look for when I hire people, what you guys are driving on personally, or I can let you go. Yeah.
What would you say is your biggest advice to student journalists who want to incorporate what you're talking about in their work, and just I guess just like the biggest advice you give student journalists and how they can use it?
Well, I think it's definitely the concept of incorporating visualization into your reporting, because whether or not you end up with a data visualization that goes out to the public and does a massive impact there, you're going to be better at reporting. I've yet to find a story that was better without facts and data and information, right? And so if you're looking at this data and you're analyzing it and you're doing a good quality interrogation before you're starting to talk to your sources, you're going to be more informed, you're going to be more ready to deal with spin, right? Which is a common example of people seeing the number and saying, I don't like what that number is, I'm going to spin it this way. And if you've spent time with that data set and you've really understood it, even if you never make a chart, you're going to be able to catch those a lot quicker and be able to talk with a little bit more authority when you're talking to your sources. Yeah?
If you have a huge amount of Excel information, how do you drill down to the important stuff without spending years?
Yeah, I mean, so thousands of data sets. The good thing about data is you may look at hundreds of thousands of rows and freak out. A computer doesn't care, right? To a computer, it's a process. Whether it's looping through the process 10 times or looping through the process 10,000 times. It's just a process to it, right? And so what I would say to you is stop looking at the large data set as a big giant thing you have to parse and start asking yourself, what are the things that I think are hidden in a column that I want to understand? And so an example I'll give you is a data set that we played around with in a workshop just yesterday. I pulled together and brought to the little class traffic tickets issued from speed cameras. You guys all know those automatic speed cameras that occur in Cedar Rapids for about 4 years, okay? It was like 260,000 rows of data, right? What there was, though, and a human being looking at that would be absolutely overwhelmed, right? But what there were in there were consistent values, right? So a ticket was issued on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, right? You know that. A ticket was issued either this year or last year or the year before that. You know that, right? And a ticket was issued for a certain speed, either 67 or 68 or 69 or 70 or 71, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so whether that digit shows up 800,000 times or 20,000 times or 15,000 times, whether more tickets were issued Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, you don't have to do the analysis to understand that, right? A tool called pivot tables within Excel is a wonderful tool for grouping and summing data on consistent values. So what we did very quickly is we said, we got this 200 and some thousand line data set. We just want to know what month the tickets were issued. Well, that's either a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11, 12. We let pivot tables worry about how big the data set was. We dragged it into pivot tables and we said group by month. Did it. Didn't matter how large it was. So I would just say, I mean, this is a little bit hard to give you a really tangible example without talking about a data set with you, about one that you're working with personally, but would just be don't be scared by size, right? The size is irrelevant to you as long as you're asking the right questions. Unless your computer freezes and then go buy a new computer. But yeah.
I just want to clarify, and I think you mentioned this, but story where the fire department response times, where people are putting in their addresses and things.
Yeah.
Was there enough data generated from people putting in stuff that you could then do other things with that, learn about your readers or learn about anything?
If you're properly tracking, I mean, the level of tracking sophistication we did was not that deep. What we simply did was watch for people entering an address. What we didn't do was capture the address, store that in a database, and make assumptions of the most engaged readers in our market are in these regions, right? Makes me look like a dummy that I didn't think of that, because that would have been a really good thing to do, right? But what you can pull information from readers if you're enticing them with little bits. Where I think actually that gets more interesting is if you have some sort of membership model that you're establishing. People hate filling out surveys, right? Like if I don't have a reason to fill out a survey, I'm probably not going to do it, right? And so if I have a registration wall on a website or some sort of membership model, and I put in front of you like, tell me everything about you, you're probably going to say, no thanks, right? And especially if they're not required fields. What you're hinting at is maybe an idea of getting information from people in a more kind of barter system. I'm going to give you a fun visualization, but you got to give me a little bit back, right? So you just gave me your address. Well, if you're logged into my site, maybe I store that in my database record for you as your address, where before you might not have given me that. You're willing to do that if you're working with me on this visualization, you're seeing where you live. If I'm doing a likelihood to die by car accident by age, check your age. Well, maybe you're going to enter your age, right? And I can pull that back and put that into your record. So that's a little bit, I don't know if to call it nefarious, but that's a way to kind of have a conversation with you over time to get more information about you, which can be useful for marketing and purposes in more product space. Yeah.
Do you try to put some kind of visualization in every story, or do you find that some stories are more needed?
Yeah, I mean, there's realities of any workspace, and the answer is absolutely not, right? I mean, we don't do data visualizations for every story. What I would say is really try to just hone in on that Miller's Law concept as you write. Most people are going to have trouble comprehending anywhere between 6 or 7 concepts during a story, and if you find yourself writing even more than 3 or 4 numbers, just stop and give yourself a chance to visualize. Data visualizations do not have to just be charts and maps and graphs, right? So there's a couple of wonderful free tools out there for you guys. If you're not familiar with the Knight Foundation, I would strongly suggest you spend some time Googling around and looking at their stuff. They have 3 tools in particular that I think are wonderful that are not numbers specific. One of them is a timeline tool called Timeline.js. It's a wonderful tool to aggregate not only just raw text and photos, but you can pull in tweets and YouTube videos and Facebook posts and you name it. So you can kind of build a data interactive space around data, right, moments in time, but not numbers. In addition to that, they have a mapping tool that allows you to tie tweets and photos and other things to geographic points and kind of walk you through a path. Really useful for things like, if you had a major disaster happen and then you kind of track people through time, or you have a major, event. I mean, you guys have football every weekend, right? You could do like a tailgating map and watch where people were geographically based off their tweets. And the last one they have that I really love is called Juxtapose, and it's a tool that lets you kind of take 2 images that are very similar, same location, but different times perhaps, maybe pre-building and post-building, overlay them and do this kind of slider effect to see the before and after. That to me is a form of data visualization. It lets you engage with the information in a more cohesive and comprehensive way, but it's not numbers, right? So you can usually find a way to engage with readers. My ask to you is don't just set it and forget it. Don't just make it and throw it out there. Put in ways to track your readership. Now, obviously, you need to be working for a property with enough readership that you can get enough input to understand, was this successful, was this not? But if you've got access, especially student newspaper, you guys have thousands of readers over the course of weeks and months, et cetera, et cetera. If you're doing a certain type of chart, you're seeing great engagement, higher time on page, that's an incentive to keep doing more of those and expand those reach. If you're seeing a type of data visualization that isn't engaging and people are not enjoying it for whatever reason, pivot your focus somewhere else. Yeah.
I don't know if you have expertise in this, but as a sports journalist, and I know analytics are on the rise even more and more, and especially data analytics, how important is that to have in your repertoire going into that kind of field?
Well, we have a robust sports department because we live in an area where Hawkeye football is king, right? And you guys are similar to Iowa in the fact that you don't have professional teams here, professional teams, right? So I'm sure Ole Miss football is kind of the big deal here. What I have found is that what you're given in the sports realm is a lot of pre-baked analytics, right? You're given the passing yards, you're given the scores, you're given all of those sorts of things. And so you're very easily able to maybe chart what was our average passing yards over the course of X games. And you can kind of see some trends in there that might be an interesting story. When you start doing that deeper level of interrogation, though, and maybe asking weird questions like, how did weather and passing yards align, right? And is there a correlation between how successful our team was over the last 10 years in certain criteria that might not be blatantly obvious in the game report? Having that inquisitive mind, especially in the off season, can lead to some interesting analysis and stories, right? And so that would be my ask in the sports realm is, yes, make the bar chart and the line chart of the stats from the game and just make that a standard part of your game report story because it's just going to be easier. We have a weekly story called Stat Pack where our main football reporter just breaks down the game by different stats and we do different visualizations to make that easier to comprehend. But if you have that inquisitive mind and you sit back and you say, okay, I got 15 years of data here. I got these last 15 years. What weird oddities are in here and what can I pair across and reference? You might find those fun feature stories.
All right, I think we got time for one more.
That's fine. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you coming out.